You feel overwhelmed by the endless mental chatter that disrupts your focus and clouds your judgment every single day. The stress of modern life has turned your mind into a battlefield where anxiety, doubt, and negative thoughts wage war against your peace and productivity, leaving you exhausted and scattered. I am Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who maintained unshakable mental clarity while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives on my shoulders. Through my daily practice of Stoic meditation and self-discipline, I developed an inner fortress that no external chaos could penetrate. What I discovered about mastering the mind will transform how you think, respond, and thrive in just 7 days. The same principles that sustained me through plagues, wars, and the burden of absolute power can give you complete mental mastery in our modern world. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far the need for mental clarity has spread. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed, the day I first wore the purple cloak of imperial authority and felt its crushing weight upon my shoulders. It was not the physical heaviness of the fabric that nearly brought me to my knees, but the sudden realization that the minds and lives of 60 million souls now rested in my hands. I was barely 40 when fate thrust the crown upon me. Until that moment, I had been Marcus, the student of philosophy, the seeker of wisdom, the man who found peace in contemplating the nature of existence. But in an instant, I became Caesar, commander of legions, judge of nations, the axis upon which the entire civilized world turned. The purple cloak became my teacher that first terrible night, as I stood alone in the imperial chambers, feeling its weight dragging at my shoulders. I understood something profound. External circumstances, no matter how overwhelming, cannot disturb the mind unless we allow them to. The cloak was heavy, yes, but the real burden was my resistance to its weight. I remember walking to my private garden, still wearing that symbol of absolute power, and sitting beneath the olive tree where I had spent countless hours in philosophical contemplation. The irony struck me like lightning. Here I was, the most powerful man in the world, and I felt more helpless than I had ever felt as a simple student of Stoicism. That's when my years of philosophical training revealed their true purpose. All those hours studying Epictetus, absorbing the wisdom of the Stoics, learning that we cannot control external events, but we can master our responses to them. Suddenly, it all crystallized into perfect clarity. I realized that ruling an empire and mastering one's own mind require identical skills. Both demand the ability to remain calm under pressure, to see clearly through chaos, to make decisions based on wisdom rather than emotion, and to accept responsibility without being crushed by its weight. The purple cloak taught me that mental sovereignty is the only true sovereignty. You can command legions, control vast territories, and wield absolute power, but if you cannot master your own thoughts and emotions, you are the poorest slave in your own empire. That night, beneath the olive tree, I made a decision that would shape every day of my reign. I would use the throne not as an escape from philosophical practice, but as the ultimate testing ground for mental mastery. Every challenge the empire faced would become an opportunity to strengthen my inner citadel. Every crisis would be training for my mind. This is what I learned in that transformative moment. The external world will always try to disturb your peace, but the trained mind can find stillness in any storm. The weight of responsibility, you're ruling an empire or simply managing your daily life, becomes bearable only when you stop fighting it, and instead use it to build mental strength. From that day forward, I understood that true power comes not from what you can control in the external world, but from how completely you can master the world within your own mind. Now I want to share with you the first and most crucial day of your mental transformation. Everything begins with how you perceive reality, and I learned this lesson in the most dramatic way possible. During my second year as emperor, a messenger burst into my chambers with news that would have shattered a weaker mind. 3 provinces were in revolt, the Danube frontier was under attack, and a plague was spreading through our eastern territories. As I watched the color drain from my advisors' faces, I felt something extraordinary happen within my own mind. Instead of panic, I experienced perfect clarity. Instead of being overwhelmed by 3 simultaneous disasters, I saw 3 opportunities to practice the discipline of perception. This is what I mean. You have power over your mind, not outside events. This realization will transform your life if you truly understand it. The bronze mirror I kept on my desk became my daily teacher. Each morning I would look into it and ask myself 3 questions that I now want to teach you. These questions have the power to transform any situation from a source of suffering into a source of strength. First question: what actually happened? Not what I feared might happen, not what others told me it meant, but what actually occurred. When the messenger reported disaster, I learned to separate the facts from the interpretations. The facts were simple. Certain events had occurred in distant places. Everything else, the fear, the sense of catastrophe, the feeling of being overwhelmed, these were additions from untrained minds, not reality itself. Second question: what aspects of this situation can I control? During that crisis, I could control my response, my decisions, and my leadership. I could not control the plague, the barbarian tribes, or the rebels' choices. This distinction between what we can and cannot influence is the foundation of all mental peace. Third question: how can this challenge strengthen my character? I began to view every obstacle as training for my mind, every difficulty as an opportunity to practice virtue. The revolts taught me patience, the plague taught me acceptance of mortality, the barbarian attacks taught me decisive action under pressure. Let me give you a practical example from my daily life. When a senator would arrive late to important meetings, disrupting our work, my initial perception might be, this man is disrespectful and incompetent. But applying the discipline of perception, I would examine this thought. What actually happened? A man arrived after the scheduled time. What could I control? My response to his lateness. How could this strengthen me? By practicing patience and focusing on solutions rather than blame, this shift in perception changes everything. The late senator was no longer an enemy of my peace, but a teacher of my patience. The problem was no longer his character, but my reaction to his behavior. Here is your first daily practice. Whenever you feel disturbed by any situation today, pause and ask yourself my 3 questions. Write down your answers. You will discover that most of your mental suffering comes not from reality itself, but from your untrained perceptions of reality. The discipline of perception is like building a muscle. It grows stronger with practice, but only if you exercise it consistently every single day. Asterisk on the second day of your mental mastery journey, I want to teach you about building an impenetrable fortress within your mind. I learned this principle during the darkest period of my reign, when external chaos threatened to overwhelm even my disciplined thoughts. It was during the Germanic campaigns, standing on the ramparts of a fortress under siege, that I truly understood the power of the inner citadel. As barbarian war cries echoed across the frozen landscape and arrows whistled overhead, I carried a small stone in my pocket, a piece of Hadrian's wall that reminded me of something profound. Just as this physical fortress protected the bodies of my soldiers, I needed to build an invisible fortress to protect my mind. The inner citadel is not a place you retreat to when life becomes difficult. It is a permanent sanctuary you carry within yourself at all times. Unlike external fortresses that can be besieged and conquered, the citadel of the mind is absolutely impregnable when properly constructed. Let me share how I built mine. Stone by stone, during those brutal winter campaigns. Each morning, before dawn broke over the Germanic forests, I would perform what I called the citadel meditation. I would close my eyes and visualize building walls around my consciousness, walls made not of stone, but of philosophical principles. The first wall was acceptance. I would remind myself that everything happening around me, the cold, the danger, the uncertainty, was exactly as it should be in this moment, not because these things were good, but because they were real, and fighting reality is the quickest way to mental defeat. This wall protected me from the exhausting battle against unchangeable circumstances. The second wall was perspective. During the siege, when messengers brought news of casualties and setbacks, I would step back mentally and view our situation from a vast distance. What seemed catastrophic in the moment often appeared manageable when seen from the perspective of eternity. This wall protected me from being overwhelmed by temporary difficulties. The third wall was purpose. Every morning, I would remind myself why I was enduring these hardships, not for glory or conquest, but to protect the civilization that allowed philosophy, art, and human dignity to flourish. This wall protected me from despair by connecting my immediate suffering to a greater meaning. The fourth wall was virtue. No matter what chaos erupted around me, I committed to responding with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. This wall protected me from making decisions based on fear or anger rather than principle. Here is what I discovered. When your inner citadel is complete, external circumstances lose their power to disturb your fundamental peace. The barbarians could surround our physical fortress, but they could never breach the fortress of my mind. You can build this same sanctuary. Each time you feel external pressures threatening your mental peace, retreat to your inner citadel. Visualize yourself surrounded by these four walls: acceptance of what is, perspective on what matters, purpose that gives meaning to difficulty, and virtue that guides your response. Practice this daily retreat, not as an escape from reality, but as a return to your truest self, the self that cannot be conquered by circumstances, wounded by others' actions, or shaken by uncertainty. Your daily exercise. Spend 10 minutes each morning visualizing your inner citadel. Make it real in your mind. Feel the strength of its walls. From this fortress, you can face any challenge the day might bring with perfect equanimity. Today, I must share with you the most difficult lesson I learned as emperor: the discipline that separates free minds from enslaved ones. It concerns the invisible chains that bind us more securely than any physical prison: our desires. I learned this truth through a simple iron ring that I wore instead of the golden imperial rings expected of Caesar. Every morning, as I placed this plain band on my finger, it reminded me of a profound realization. Contentment comes not from getting what we want, but from wanting what we have. My greatest personal struggle was not with barbarian invasions or political conspiracies, was with my own ambitious desires. When I became emperor, I discovered that absolute power has a terrible effect on the mind. It makes you believe that everything you want should be yours, and immediately, this is the path to mental slavery. I remember one particular evening when a delegation arrived from Egypt, bringing news that the grain harvest was smaller than expected. My first impulse was anger. How dare the Nile fail to provide what Rome needed? I wanted to command the river to flood, to order the earth to be more fertile, to demand that nature bend to imperial will. Then I looked at my iron ring and understood the absurdity of my desire. I was wanting to control things that were entirely beyond any mortal's power. My desire was making me miserable, and worse, it was making me foolish. This is what I learned about desire. Every want that extends beyond what is within your power is a source of slavery. When you desire things you cannot control: other people's approval, perfect health, favorable circumstances, recognition for your efforts, You become a slave to forces beyond your influence. The discipline of desire requires a fundamental shift in how you think about wanting. Instead of trying to get what you want, you must learn to want what you get. This is not passive acceptance, it is active wisdom. Let me teach you the practice I developed, which I called the desire audit. Each evening, I would examine every feeling of dissatisfaction I had experienced that day and trace it back to its source. Invariably, I found that my suffering came from wanting something to be different than it was. Was I frustrated with a senator's incompetence? I was desiring him to be more capable than he was. Was I anxious about a military campaign's outcome? I was desiring certainty about future events. Was I disappointed by someone's ingratitude? I was desiring them to appreciate my efforts. In each case, my desire was focused on something outside my control. The senator's abilities, future outcomes, other people's emotions, these things were not mine to command. No matter how powerful my position. Here is the transformation. When you discipline your desires to focus only on what is truly yours, choices, your responses, your character development, your effort, you discover an extraordinary freedom. You are no longer dependent on external circumstances for your happiness. I wore that iron ring for 20 years, and it taught me that true wealth is not having everything you want, but wanting nothing more than what you have. This does not mean becoming passive or unambitious. It means directing your ambition toward the only things you can actually control: your virtues, your wisdom, your responses to life's challenges, your daily practice. Before wanting anything today, ask yourself, is this within my power to control? If not, practice preferring what actually happens over what you wish would happen. Asterisk on the 4th day of your mental transformation. I must teach you perhaps the most liberating skill a human mind can master: the art of letting go. I learned this lesson in my private garden, where a single autumn leaf became one of my greatest teachers. I was walking through the palace gardens during a particularly difficult period, when every decision I made seemed to create new problems. A trade dispute with Parthia had escalated. My adopted son, Lucius Verus, had died unexpectedly in the east, and the Senate was questioning my handling of the Germanic tribes. The weight of these failures pressed down on my mind like stones, as I walked, consumed by thoughts of what I should have done differently. An autumn leaf fell from the oak tree above me and landed at my feet. Something about its gentle descent captured my attention completely. Here was a leaf that had spent months clinging to its branch, drawing life from the tree, serving its purpose. Yet when the season changed, it released its grip without struggle and fell gracefully to the earth. I picked up that leaf and carried it with me for years, pressing it between the pages of my personal writings. It became my teacher in the art of release, the practice of letting go of mental burdens that serve no purpose except to cause suffering. The human mind has a terrible tendency to cling. We cling to past mistakes, replaying them endlessly, as if mental repetition could somehow change what has already occurred. We cling to future worries, rehearsing disasters that may never happen. We cling to grudges against people who have wronged us, carrying their actions like stones in our hearts. We cling to expectations of how things should be, fighting reality with our desires. All of this clinging creates mental suffering, just as a hand that grasps too tightly cannot receive new gifts. A mind that holds too tightly to past and future cannot experience the peace available in the present moment. Let me share the technique I developed for releasing mental burdens. Each evening, I would perform what I called the release ritual. I would sit in my garden, hold that pressed leaf in my hands, and systematically examine everything my mind was clinging to that day. First, I would identify past events that were still occupying my thoughts. Perhaps a harsh word I had spoken to an advisor, or a military decision that had cost lives. I would acknowledge these events, learn whatever lessons they offered, then consciously release them. I could not change the past by thinking about it, but I could poison my present by refusing to let it go. Next, I would examine my worries about the future. Would the barbarians attack again? Would the plague spread further? Would my successor be worthy of the throne? I would ask myself, is there any action I can take today to address this concern? If yes, I would commit to that action. If no, I would release the worry as completely useless mental activity. Finally, I would release my grip on expectations of how people should behave, how situations should develop, how life should treat me. This was the hardest practice of all, because it meant accepting that the world would never conform perfectly to my will. The art of letting go is not about becoming passive or indifferent. It is about directing your mental energy only toward what serves your peace and effectiveness. Release what you cannot change so you can focus completely on what you can influence. Day 5 brings us to the heart of mental mastery. Learning to live fully in the only moment that actually exists. I discovered this truth through a simple sundial that I kept in my private study, watching its shadow move across the bronze surface as I struggled with one of the most fundamental human problems. My mind, like yours, was constantly wandering. During important Senate meetings, I would find myself thinking about military campaigns on distant frontiers. While reviewing legal cases, my thoughts would drift to philosophical questions. During quiet moments with my family, I would worry about political challenges awaiting me the next day. I was physically present but mentally absent, and this divided attention was stealing my peace and effectiveness. The sundial taught me something profound. Only the present moment truly exists. The past is a memory which exists only in your mind, right now. The future is a projection which also exists only in your mind right now. But we spend most of our mental energy living everywhere except where we actually are. I began to understand why the wandering mind is always an unhappy mind. When your attention is scattered across past regrets and future anxieties, you cannot fully experience the peace, beauty, or opportunity available in this moment. You become like a man dying of thirst while standing in a clear stream because he is thinking about tomorrow's rain. Let me share a specific example of how present moment mastery changed my leadership. During one particularly tense negotiation with Germanic tribal leaders, I noticed my mind racing ahead to all the possible outcomes. What if they rejected our terms? What if they were planning treachery? What if this meeting led to war? These future-focused thoughts were making me anxious and reactive. Then I remembered the sundial's lesson. I brought my complete attention to what was actually happening in that moment. I was sitting across from men who, despite being enemies, showed courage by coming to negotiate. I could hear the genuine concern in their voices for their people's welfare. I could see the intelligence in their eyes as they evaluated our proposals. By anchoring my awareness in the present, I discovered information and opportunities that my wandering mind had missed. I found common ground I hadn't noticed before. I spoke with clarity instead of anxiety. The negotiation succeeded precisely because I was mentally present for it. Here is the technique I developed for present moment mastery, which I called the moment anchor. Throughout each day, I would use my breathing as an anchor to pull my wandering attention back to now. Whenever I noticed my mind drifting to past or future, I would take 3 conscious breaths and ask myself, what is actually happening right now? Not what I wished was happening, not what I feared might happen, but what was actually occurring in this moment. Often, I discovered that the present moment was far more manageable and peaceful than my worried projections about it. I also learned to use my senses as gateways to the present. When my mind wandered during conversations, I would focus completely on the other person's voice, their facial expressions, the meaning behind their words. When anxiety about future challenges arose, I would notice what I could see, hear, and feel in my immediate environment. The present moment became my sanctuary. No matter how chaotic the external world became, I could always return to the simple reality of now my breathing, my immediate surroundings, the actual facts of my current situation, rather than my mental elaborations about them. Your practice. Today, catch your mind wandering and gently return it to the present moment at least 20 times. Use your breath as an anchor. Asterisk, on the 6th day of your mental training, I want to teach you how right action creates mental clarity and unshakable confidence. The writing stylus I used to record my daily meditations became my teacher in this crucial discipline to practice of aligning your thoughts with virtuous action. I learned this lesson during one of the most challenging decisions of my reign. A plague was devastating the eastern provinces, killing thousands daily, while barbarian tribes pressed our northern borders. My advisors urged me to choose: protect Rome by abandoning the plague-stricken regions, or send aid that would weaken our military defenses. Both choices seemed to lead to disaster. As I sat with my stylus that night, writing my thoughts and seeking clarity, I realized that my mental anguish came not from the difficulty of the situation, but from trying to find a perfect solution that didn't exist. I was paralyzing myself by seeking an action that would avoid all negative consequences. Then I understood something that transformed my approach to decision making. The goal is not to find the perfect action, but to choose the most virtuous action available, then execute it with complete commitment. Mental peace comes not from perfect outcomes, but from the knowledge that you acted according to your highest principles. The discipline of action requires 3 essential practices that I want to share with you. First, act from wisdom rather than emotion. When facing any decision, I learned to pause and ask, what would the wisest version of myself do in this situation? Not what would feel good, not what would be easiest, not what would make others happy, but what would be most aligned with virtue, with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. In the case of the plague and barbarian threats, wisdom told me that abandoning suffering people to save resources was not worthy of Rome's principles. The virtuous action was to send aid while finding creative solutions for defense. This decision led to innovative military strategies that actually strengthened our position. Second, accept responsibility without being paralyzed by it. Many people avoid taking action because they fear making the wrong choice. But I learned that failing to choose is itself a choice, usually the worst possible choice. The disciplined mind accepts that any significant action carries risks, but understands that inaction carries even greater risks. When you act from virtue, you can accept whatever consequences follow without losing your peace of mind. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control whether your actions align with your principles. Third, commit completely to your chosen course of action. Once I decided to send aid to the plague regions, I didn't waste mental energy second-guessing that decision. Doubt and regret are useless emotions that drain the energy needed for effective execution. I developed what I called the virtue checker, daily practice of reviewing my actions and decisions through the lens of the 4 cardinal virtues. Each evening, I would ask myself, did I act with wisdom today, choosing the most rational course available? Did I act with courage, doing what was right despite difficulties? Did I act with justice, considering the welfare of others? Did I act with self-discipline, controlling my impulses and emotions? This practice created a positive cycle. Virtuous action led to mental clarity, which led to better decisions, which led to more virtuous action. My confidence grew not from external success, but from the knowledge that I was consistently choosing the path of virtue regardless of circumstances. Your daily practice. Before taking any significant action today, pause and ask yourself what the most virtuous choice would be. Then commit to that choice completely, accepting whatever consequences may follow. Welcome to the 7th and most crucial day of your mental transformation. As dawn breaks on this final day of training, I want to share with you the culmination of everything you have learned, the establishment of a daily practice that will maintain your mental mastery for life. I keep a simple laurel crown in my private chambers, not as a symbol of imperial power, but as a reminder of the greatest victory any human can achieve: complete mastery over one's own mind. Each morning, as I place this crown on my head during my dawn contemplation, I am crowning the philosopher within me, celebrating another day's opportunity to practice mental discipline. 7 days ago, you began this journey with a mind probably much like mine was before I learned these disciplines: scattered, reactive, often overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control. Today, you possess the same tools that sustained me through plagues, wars, betrayals, and the enormous burden of ruling an empire. You have learned to perceive clearly, build inner strength, control desires, release mental burdens, live in the present, and act from virtue. But here is what I must tell you: mastering these practices once is not enough. Mental discipline, like physical fitness, requires daily maintenance. The mind that is not exercised daily will return to its old patterns of chaos and suffering. This is why the 7th day is not an ending, it is the beginning of your new life. Let me share with you the master's morning routine that I have followed for over 20 years. This practice has never failed to center my mind and prepare me for whatever challenges the day might bring. I wake before dawn, while the world is still quiet and my mind is clear from sleep. In these precious moments before the demands of the day begin, I perform my mental exercises, just as a soldier maintains his weapons before battle. First, I practice the discipline of perception by reviewing the day ahead. I identify the challenges I will likely face and prepare my mind to see them clearly, separating facts from interpretations, focusing on what I can control rather than what I cannot. Next, I strengthen my inner citadel by spending several minutes in meditation, visualizing the walls of acceptance, perspective, purpose, and virtue surrounding my consciousness. I remind myself that no external circumstance can disturb my fundamental peace. Then I practice the discipline of desire by examining my wants and expectations for the day. I release any desires focused on things beyond my control and align my intentions with virtue rather than outcomes. I follow this with the art of letting go, releasing any mental burdens from yesterday's mistakes, regrets, grudges, or worries that might cloud my judgment today. I ground myself in present moment, mastery by spending time in conscious awareness of my breathing, my body, my immediate environment. I anchor my attention in the only moment that truly exists. Finally, I prepare for the discipline of action by setting clear intentions for how I will respond to challenges with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. This entire routine takes only 20 minutes, but it creates a foundation of mental clarity that supports me through the most demanding days. On mornings when I have skipped this practice, I notice immediately how much more reactive and scattered my thinking becomes. The philosopher's dawn is not just about morning practice. It is about approaching each new day as an opportunity for growth, each challenge as training for your character, each moment as a chance to practice virtue. You now possess the knowledge that took me decades to develop. The question is not whether these practices work. They have proven themselves through centuries of application. The question is whether you will commit to using them daily. Now I must tell you about the greatest test of mental mastery I ever faced. The years when death stalked through every street of Rome and the empire seemed on the verge of collapse. The Antonine Plague, as historians would later call it, taught me that mental discipline is not a luxury for peaceful times, but an absolute necessity during crisis. I kept medical scrolls on my desk during those dark years, studying everything. Physicians knew about disease while watching helplessly as the plague claimed nearly 5 million lives across our territories. These scrolls became my teachers in something more important than medicine. They showed me how mental strength directly affects physical survival and leadership effectiveness during catastrophe. When the plague first reached Rome, I watched fear spread faster than the disease itself. Citizens abandoned their duties, soldiers deserted their posts, even senators fled the capital. The empire was disintegrating, not from the plague alone, but from the panic and despair it created in people's minds. In that moment, I understood that my primary responsibility was not just to organize medical care or maintain order, but to demonstrate that a human mind could remain clear and purposeful, even when surrounded by death and uncertainty. My mental state would determine whether the empire survived or collapsed. The practice I developed during those plague years became my foundation for handling any crisis. I called it finding opportunity in catastrophe, the ability to see how extreme challenges can accelerate personal growth and reveal previously hidden strengths. First, I learned to transform fear into wisdom. When reports arrived daily of spreading death and economic collapse, my initial response was the same terror everyone felt. But I trained myself to ask, what can this crisis teach me? Fear is often information disguised as emotion. The plague taught me about the fragility of life, the importance of present moment awareness, the need for decisive action during uncertainty. Instead of being paralyzed by fear of death, I used the plague as a daily reminder to focus on what truly mattered. When you are surrounded by mortality, trivial concerns fall away and essential priorities become crystal clear. Second, I discovered how to lead others through mental example during crisis. People look to their leaders not just for practical solutions, but for emotional stability. If I remained calm and purposeful, others could find their own strength. If I panicked, the empire would panic with me. I made sure to be visible throughout Rome during the worst periods, not just issuing orders from safety, but walking among the people, visiting the sick, demonstrating that courage is possible even when facing unknown dangers. This was not reckless bravery, it was calculated leadership designed to show others that mental discipline could overcome panic. Third, I learned to make decisions under extreme uncertainty. During crisis, you rarely have complete information, but you cannot wait for perfect knowledge before acting. The plague taught me to gather the best information available quickly, consult wise advisors, then commit to a course of action based on virtue rather than guaranteed outcomes. The mental techniques you have learned in the past, 7 days perception, inner strength, desire, control, letting go, present moment awareness, and virtuous action all become more powerful under pressure. Crisis strips away everything non-essential and forces you to rely on your deepest mental resources. What I discovered during those plague years is that the human mind, properly trained, can find stability in any storm and strength in any adversity. The external world may collapse, but the inner citadel remains unshakable. Let me tell you about maintaining mental discipline. When death whistles past your ear and the very ground shakes with the thunder of war, the Germanic campaigns taught me that philosophical practice is not meant for quiet contemplation alone. It must work in the chaos of battle, or it is worthless. I carried a battle-worn map with me throughout those campaigns, marking territories where barbarian tribes tested not just our military strength, but my ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. That map became stained with mud, blood, and the sweat of desperate decisions made when hesitation meant death for thousands of men who trusted my leadership. The first lesson the Germanic forests taught me was that mental discipline becomes most crucial precisely when it seems most impossible to maintain. When arrows are falling like rain and your advisors are shouting conflicting counsel, when you can smell the fear in your own soldiers and see doubt in their eyes, these are the moments that test whether your philosophical training is real or merely intellectual decoration. I remember one night during the siege of a Marcomani stronghold when everything seemed to be going wrong. Our supply lines were threatened, winter was approaching, and scouts reported that enemy reinforcements were just days away. My generals were arguing about whether to retreat or press the attack. Some wanted to risk everything on one decisive assault. Others urged caution that might lead to slow starvation in that tent. Surrounded by the noise of debate and the distant sounds of enemy preparations, I did something that probably saved the campaign. I applied the mental disciplines you have already learned. First, I used the discipline of perception to separate facts from interpretations. The facts were, we had food for 10 days. The enemy stronghold was well defended, but not impregnable. Reinforcements were coming, but hadn't arrived yet. Everything else, the fear, the sense of doom, the feeling that we were trapped, these were mental additions, not reality. Next, I retreated to my inner citadel. While chaos swirled around me, I found that place of perfect calm within my mind where I could think clearly. From this sanctuary, I could evaluate our options without being influenced by the panic and pressure surrounding me. Then I applied the discipline of action, asking not what choice would guarantee success, but what choice aligned with virtue and wisdom given the information available. The virtuous path was clear: protect my soldiers while fulfilling our mission to secure the frontier. The solution came from this mental clarity. Instead of choosing between retreat and assault, we would create a third option through strategic deception. We made the enemy believe we were retreating while actually positioning for a surprise attack from an unexpected direction. This campaign taught me that external danger actually clarifies internal priorities. When your life is genuinely at risk, you stop worrying about trivial concerns and focus completely on what matters most. The proximity of death strips away all pretense and reveals your true character. Mental discipline under fire also requires absolute presence. In battle, your mind cannot wander to past regrets or future fears. You must be completely anchored in the immediate moment. A general whose attention drifts for even seconds can lose battles and lives. The greatest discovery from those campaigns was this: the same mental practices that create peace in quiet moments also create effectiveness in crisis. Philosophy is not escape from reality, is preparation for reality's greatest challenges. I must share with you the most dangerous temptation. Any human mind can face the corruption that comes with unlimited power over others. The golden scales of justice that sat on my desk served as a daily reminder of something most people never understand. Absolute power is not a privilege to be enjoyed, but a burden that tests your character every single day. When you can command anything you desire, when no one can refuse your requests, when your slightest wish becomes law for millions of people, this is when mental discipline becomes absolutely essential. Power without inner restraint creates monsters, and I watched good men transform into tyrants, simply because they never learned to master their own impulses. The greatest struggle of my reign was not with external enemies, but with the temptation to use my unlimited authority for personal gratification rather than public good. Every day brought opportunities to indulge my desires, silence my critics, or take revenge on those who had wronged me. The corruption of power is subtle. It whispers that you deserve whatever you want because of your position. I remember the day a senator publicly criticized one of my decisions, calling it the foolish whim of a philosopher playing at being emperor. My first impulse was rage. How dare this man insult Caesar? Within moments, I could have had him arrested, exiled, or worse. The power to destroy him was literally at my fingertips. Then I looked at those golden scales and remembered something. Crucial power is not about what you can do, but about what you choose not to do. True strength lies not in exercising authority, but in restraining it when restraint serves justice better than action. This incident taught me to develop what I called the humility practice. Each morning, I would remind myself that my power came not from personal superiority, but from the temporary trust of the Roman people. I was a servant holding authority, not a master who owned it. The practice required 3 daily disciplines. First, I would remember that my position was temporary, was a steward, not a permanent ruler. This perspective prevented me from believing that power was my personal property to use however I wished. Second, I forced myself to listen to criticism and dissenting opinions, even when they stung my pride. Power naturally surrounds you with people who tell you what you want to hear. Maintaining mental clarity requires deliberately seeking out uncomfortable truths. Third, I used my authority primarily to empower others rather than to aggrandize myself. The greatest satisfaction came not from commanding obedience, but from helping capable people achieve their potential in service to Rome. Power taught me that mental discipline is not just personal development, it is a moral responsibility. When your decisions affect millions of lives, inner chaos becomes outer catastrophe. The emperor who cannot control his own mind will inevitably lose control of his empire. The golden scales reminded me daily that justice requires balance, balancing my personal desires against public needs, my emotions against rational judgment, my power against restraint. This balance is only possible when the mind is disciplined enough to choose virtue over impulse, especially when no external force can compel you to make the right choice. Absolute power reveals who you truly are when no one can stop you from being your worst self. In the depths of night, when the empire slept and the weight of the day's decisions pressed upon my soul, I discovered the transformative power of solitary contemplation. The simple clay oil lamp that illuminated my evening reflections became my companion in the most important work an emperor or any person can do, the honest examination of one's own mind and character. These night meditations, performed in the silence of my private chambers with only that flickering flame for company, revealed truths about mental mastery that daylight discussions and public ceremonies could never teach. It was during these solitary hours that I wrote the thoughts that would later become my meditations, not for publication, but for my own spiritual development. Solitude has a unique power to strip away pretense and reveal your authentic self. During the day, surrounded by advisors, soldiers, and citizens, I was Caesar. The role demanded certain responses, certain dignity, certain strength. But alone with my thoughts in the lamplight, I could acknowledge my fears, examine my mistakes, and confront the parts of my character that needed improvement. The practice I developed during these nighttime sessions became essential to maintaining mental clarity under the enormous pressures of rule. Each evening, I would review the day just ended through what I called the 3 examinations. The first examination was honesty about my mistakes. I would recall each decision, each conversation, each moment when I had fallen short of my philosophical ideals. Had I acted from emotion rather than wisdom? Had I spoken harshly when patience would have been more effective? Had I made assumptions instead of seeking facts? This practice was painful but necessary. You cannot improve what you refuse to acknowledge. The second examination focused on lessons learned. Every mistake, every challenge, every difficult person I had encountered during the day contained teachings if I was willing to extract them. The senator who frustrated me with his stubbornness taught me patience. The military setback that worried me taught me acceptance of uncertainty. The advisor who disappointed me taught me the importance of clear communication. The third examination was preparation for tomorrow's challenges. I would consider the meetings, decisions, and difficulties awaiting me, not to worry about them, but to prepare my mind to respond with virtue rather than react with impulse. This mental rehearsal allowed me to approach each new day with intention rather than simply responding to whatever circumstances arose. The oil lamp taught me that mental clarity requires regular periods of undisturbed reflection. Just as the body needs rest to restore physical strength, the mind needs solitude to process experiences, integrate lessons, and reconnect with fundamental principles. During these evening meditations, I also practiced what I called the perspective exercise. I would imagine viewing my daily concerns from an enormous distance from the edge of the empire, from 100 years in the future, from the perspective of eternity itself. This practice consistently revealed how small most of my worries actually were and how temporary even my greatest challenges would prove to be. Solitude became my sanctuary, not for escape from responsibility, but for preparation to carry responsibility more wisely. In the silence, I could hear the voice of wisdom that gets drowned out by the noise of daily obligations and social expectations. I must tell you about the profound humility required for true mental mastery, the recognition that no matter how much you have learned, you must remain a student throughout your entire life. The philosophical scrolls containing the teachings of Epictetus that I kept in my private library became my greatest treasures, reminding me daily that wisdom comes not from isolation, but from learning from those who have walked the path before. My relationship with the Stoic masters, particularly Epictetus, taught me something essential about mental development. Intellectual pride is the enemy of growth. When I first became emperor, I was tempted to believe that my position somehow qualified me as a philosopher equal to the great teachers. This arrogance nearly stunted my development completely. Epictetus had been a slave who achieved greater mental freedom than most emperors ever experience. This paradox humbled me profoundly. Here was a man who had owned nothing, controlled nothing, commanded no one, yet he had mastered the one domain that truly matters, his own mind. His teachings reached across the centuries to challenge my assumptions about power, freedom, and happiness. The scroll containing his discourses became my evening companion, while I wielded the authority to command legions and govern provinces. I approached these teachings as a student approaches a master, with respect, openness, and acknowledgement of my own ignorance. One passage from Epictetus transformed my entire approach to daily challenges. Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants. Reading this, while sitting surrounded by the treasures of empire, I understood how completely I had misunderstood the nature of freedom. I had thought that controlling external circumstances would bring peace. But Epictetus taught me that peace comes from needing less, not from having more. Another teaching that reshaped my thinking was his emphasis on the dichotomy of control. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This simple distinction became the foundation of every decision I made as emperor. Instead of trying to control outcomes, I focused on controlling my responses. Instead of demanding that others meet my expectations, I focused on meeting my own standards. The Stoic Brotherhood taught me that learning requires intellectual humility. No matter how much knowledge you accumulate, there is always more to discover about managing your mind effectively. The emperor who stops learning becomes a fool with unlimited power, a dangerous combination for both himself and those he governs. I also learned from contemporary philosophers, and even from people who had never heard of Stoicism but embodied its principles naturally. A simple soldier who faced death with calm courage could teach me as much about mental strength as any philosophical treatise. A farmer who accepted drought without bitterness could demonstrate acceptance better than scholarly discussions. The practice I developed was active learning deliberately, seeking wisdom from every person and situation I encountered. I began to see everyone as a potential teacher, the critic who showed me my blind spots, the subordinate who demonstrated creative problem-solving, even the enemy who revealed my own weaknesses. This approach required abandoning the ego's desire to be seen as the wisest person in any room. Instead, I cultivated what I called philosophical curiosity, the genuine desire to learn something valuable from every interaction and experience. Mental mastery is not a destination you reach, but a practice you maintain through continuous learning and growth. Now, I must share with you the most heartbreaking challenge I faced as both emperor and father, the attempt to pass mental mastery to the next generation. The wax tablet I used to record lessons for my son Commodus became a symbol of both hope and profound disappointment, teaching me that wisdom cannot be inherited like property or transferred like imperial authority. As Commodus grew from boy to man, I watched with growing alarm as he showed little interest in the philosophical disciplines that had sustained me through the darkest challenges of rule. He was intelligent, physically capable, and charming when he chose to be, but he lacked the inner discipline that transforms raw ability into genuine leadership. The teaching tablet contained my attempts to communicate the essential lessons: how to distinguish between what you can and cannot control, how to find strength in adversity, how to make decisions based on virtue rather than personal advantage. I wrote these lessons carefully, trying to translate abstract philosophical concepts into practical guidance a young man could understand and apply. But I learned something painful about teaching mental mastery. You cannot give someone else the motivation to develop inner discipline. They must discover for themselves the necessity of mental training, usually through their own struggles and failures. Wisdom that is imposed from outside remains superficial. Only wisdom that grows from personal experience takes deep root. My failure with Commodus taught me important truths about the nature of legacy. I had assumed that because mental discipline had been essential for my success, my son would naturally embrace these same practices. I discovered that each person must find their own path to inner development, and that path often looks very different from what their teachers expect. However, this disappointment also revealed something encouraging. The principles themselves are timeless and transferable, even when specific individuals reject them. The mental disciplines that sustained me through plague, war, and the burden of absolute power could help anyone who was willing to practice them consistently. I began to understand that my true legacy would not be the specific person who succeeded me on the throne, but the ideas and practices I preserved for future generations who might face similar challenges. The tablet became not just a record of failed instruction, but a repository of tested wisdom that could serve others centuries later. The challenge of teaching mental mastery to Commodus showed me the importance of living as an example rather than simply offering instruction. Young people learn more from watching how you handle stress, disappointment, and difficult decisions than from listening to your explanations of philosophical principles. I realized that every public action was a teaching moment, not just for my son, but for every person who observed how an emperor could choose virtue over convenience, wisdom over impulse, service over self. My behavior during crises would teach more about mental discipline than any written lesson. That the teaching tablet also became a reminder that impact extends far beyond immediate family or direct students. The mental practices you develop and demonstrate influence everyone around you, creating ripples that spread in directions you may never see. Your commitment to mental mastery becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch through your example of calm, strength, wise decision, and unshakable inner peace. Let me tell you about the most intimate act of mental discipline I ever practiced: the daily writing that became my pathway to psychological clarity and unknown to me at the time. my gift to future generations seeking their own mental mastery. The bound papyrus that contained my private thoughts, never intended for other eyes, became the repository of everything I learned about training the human mind. These writings, which you now know as my meditations, began not as philosophical treatises, but as personal exercises in honest self-examination. Each evening, after the day's imperial duties were complete, I would take stylus in hand and confront the most important question any person can ask: how did I handle my mind today? The practice of writing crystallized my thoughts in ways that mere contemplation never could. When you force yourself to articulate your insights and struggles in words, vague impressions become clear principles, confused emotions become understood, patterns and fleeting wisdom becomes permanent guidance. I wrote these thoughts for myself as a form of mental training. When I struggled with anger toward incompetent advisors, I would write, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This was not moral instruction for others, but a reminder to myself about where to focus my mental energy. When I felt overwhelmed by the endless responsibilities of rule, I would write, "Confine yourself to the present," not because this was a new philosophical insight, but because I needed to remind my wandering mind of a truth I kept forgetting under pressure. When I faced mortality during the plague years, watching death claim people I cared about, I wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." These words helped me process grief and find acceptance of life's most difficult realities. The act of writing became a form of mental housekeeping, organizing my thoughts, processing my experiences, extracting lessons from my mistakes, and clarifying my principles for future challenges. Each entry was like holding a mirror to my mind, seeing clearly what was happening in my consciousness without the distortions of emotion or self-deception. Through this daily practice, I discovered that honest self-examination through writing has several unique benefits. First, it creates distance between you and your immediate emotional reactions. When you write, "I felt angry today because ... you automatically shift from being consumed by anger to observing and understanding it. Second, writing forces precision. In thinking, you cannot write clearly about confused thoughts. The process of finding words for your mental states naturally clarifies and organizes them. Third, written reflection creates a dialogue between your current self and your wiser self. When I reread earlier entries, I often found insights that my present moment stress had made me forget. Most importantly, the writing practice revealed patterns in my thinking that I would never have noticed otherwise. I could see which types of situations consistently triggered emotional reactions, which mental habits served me well, and which needed to be changed. Your mind, like mine, benefits enormously from this practice of written reflection. Take time each day to write honestly about your mental state, your reactions to challenges, and the lessons you are learning about mastering your thoughts and emotions. In my final years, as illness weakened my body while barbarian pressures continued. Along our northern borders, I kept a small skull on my desk as what philosophers call a memento mori, reminder of mortality. This simple object became my greatest teacher in the ultimate mental discipline, preparing for death with the same systematic approach I had used to prepare for every other challenge of life. Most people avoid thinking about death, as if ignoring mortality could somehow prevent it. But I learned that contemplating death regularly is not morbid. It is the most clarifying practice available to the human mind. When you truly accept that your time is limited, every decision becomes sharper, every moment becomes more precious, and every worry about trivial matters simply evaporates. During my final campaign along the Danube, fighting Germanic tribes while battling the illness that would eventually claim my life, I practiced what I called death, preparation not as a surrender to despair, but as the ultimate exercise in mental mastery. The first element of this practice was accepting impermanence as the fundamental nature of existence. Everything that lives must die. Everything that begins must end. Everything that rises must fall. This is not a tragedy, is simply the structure of reality. Fighting against impermanence creates suffering. Accepting it creates peace. I would look at that skull each morning and remind myself, this day might be your last. How will you use it? This perspective eliminated most of the petty concerns that typically consumed my mental energy. When you might have only hours remaining, you stop worrying about whether people appreciate your efforts or whether future historians will judge your decisions favorably. The second element was viewing each day as complete in itself. Instead of postponing important conversations, meaningful experiences, or expressions of gratitude until some future moment, I approached each day as if it were my final opportunity to live according to my values. This practice transformed my relationships with everyone around me. I stopped taking people for granted, stopped assuming there would always be tomorrow to repair damaged friendships or express appreciation for loyal service. The awareness of mortality made me more present and more genuine in every interaction. The third element was finding peace through the idea of legacy, not the monuments or conquests that might preserve my name, but the positive influence my life had created in other people. When you focus on how your existence has contributed to the growth and welfare of others, death becomes less frightening because you realize that the best parts of yourself will continue through the lives you have touched. My final months taught me that preparing for death is really about learning to live fully. When you accept that your time is finite, you stop wasting mental energy on things that do not matter and concentrate completely on what does matter: virtue, wisdom, love, service to others, and the daily practice of mental discipline. The skull reminded me that death is not the opposite of life, is the completion of life, and a life lived with consistent mental mastery, regardless of its length, is a life well lived. Contemplating mortality clarifies every priority and eliminates every excuse for postponing the development of inner strength and wisdom. As I near the end of what I can share with you, I want you to understand something that has taken me a lifetime to fully grasp. The mind that masters itself becomes immortal, not in the sense of living forever in the body, but in the sense of participating in something eternal and unchanging. Realm of wisdom, virtue, and truth. The perpetual flame that burns in the temple of Vesta has become, in my final years, a symbol of what you can achieve through consistent mental discipline. Just as that flame has burned continuously for centuries, the wisdom you develop through daily practice of mental mastery becomes part of an unbroken chain of human understanding that stretches across generations. You now possess the same tools that sustained me through plague and war, through the burden of absolute power and the challenge of personal loss. These are not merely my discoveries, they are principles that wise men and women have tested throughout history and found reliable. Epictetus discovered them in slavery. I applied them from a throne. You will prove them in whatever circumstances define your life. But here is what you must understand. Possessing these tools is not the same as using them. Knowledge without application remains sterile philosophy. The transformation you experience during our 7 days together will fade unless you commit to daily practice of what you have learned. Mental mastery requires the same dedication that any skill demands. A musician does not practice scales for 7 days and then expect to remain virtuosic for life. A soldier does not train for a week and then assume his conditioning will last forever. Your mind, like your body, requires consistent exercise to maintain its strength and flexibility. The path forward is both simple and demanding. Each morning, as you begin your day, remember the disciplines we have explored together. Perceive clearly, Retreat to your inner citadel when necessary. Control your desires. Release what you cannot change. Anchor yourself in the present moment, and act from virtue rather than impulse. These practices will be tested. Life will present you with challenges that seem to exceed your capacity for calm response. You will face losses that tempt you toward despair, provocations that trigger anger, uncertainties that invite anxiety. In these moments, remember that external circumstances have no power over your fundamental peace unless you grant them that power. The legacy I leave you is not my personal story, but the timeless principles that can guide any human being toward mental freedom. 2,000 years from now, when my name is forgotten and the Roman Empire is a historical curiosity, these truths about training the mind will remain as relevant as they are. Today, you are now part of an ancient lineage of people who have chosen inner development over external accumulation, wisdom over mere cleverness, character over reputation. This lineage includes emperors and slaves, generals and farmers, philosophers and ordinary people who simply decided to take responsibility for their own mental states. Your mind, properly trained, becomes a sanctuary that no external force can violate, a source of strength that no circumstance can exhaust, and a wellspring of peace that no chaos can disturb. This is your inheritance. Use it well.